Aaron Akulis here with the Peace on Drugs podcast. Intro and outro music provided by Twiggy Branches. Check them out on all streaming services. Peaceniks, I'm so excited. Getting to interview authors of books I've read and enjoyed was one of the first things I looked forward to doing this podcast. We started the podcast in March of 2021, and now this last episode of 2021, because we're taking 1 week off for the holidays, is author of the book The Weight of Air, David Poses. So not only are we ending this year on a high note with our first author guest, we will also be kicking off the new year with our second author guest, Carolyn Zworenstein, who wrote the book On Opium. It was great talking with David as we talked about his book and his views on rehab and addiction. You want a little taste of this podcast? I'll give you a little taste. And I mean, the idea that we're going to, if we legalize and regulate, that we're just going to say, all right, meth's now available at Walgreens, go get some. It's not going to be like that. We have a way to regulate it safely, and people that's their drug that they need, it helps them out. They can go talk to a doctor, and it's between them and their doctor.
Disagree. Sorry. We should have drugs in drugstores the way that we have alcohol in liquor stores. I mean,
you mean over the counter?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why you can walk into, I mean, look, my wife likes, wine and champagne every now and again. We have people over who drink sometimes. So I go to the liquor store. I could buy all kinds of booze, no problem, that is, lethal amounts of anything. But I can't walk into the drug equivalent of that. Like, why not? I mean, really, why wouldn't we do that?
Heroin on the shelves. I love it. After considering this, I like the idea of removing the doctor and treating the opium user as patient, as sick, stigmatized. We don't treat people who drink as diseased. Some, but not the social drinks after work person. I think we should have a separate store for opiates, which is what I believe David was saying. The way places like Colorado sell cannabis and places like Rhode Island handle alcohol. You can't buy any alcohol at the grocery store in Rhode Island, but it's easy to get. You can get it at a restaurant or a package store, which is usually a little store right beside the grocery store. This makes it easier to keep out of the hands of children and makes the purchase less of an impulse purchase. But David's right. If an adult chooses to do heroin over alcohol, then that's that person's right to make that decision for themselves. I think adults should have the right to decide which way they choose to live and experience their own consciousness. Now, selling this idea to a heavily propagandized American voting population will not be easy. But we're trying. That's what this podcast is all about. Changing people's minds, getting people to see the actual reality as it is. All right, Peaceniks, let's dive in.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society.
What are your thoughts on the drug problem?
I had a great time doing drugs.
So tonight, from our family to yours, from our home to yours, thank you for joining us.
This is the Peace on Drugs.
This is really cool having you on this podcast, and thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so I finished your book a few weeks ago. Great book, great work.
Thank you.
And really powerful story. We're going to get into that, but I wanted to start with your love for Radiohead.
Yes.
Are you still big into Radiohead?
I'm huge into Radiohead, and I'm not getting enough Radiohead questions, so I'm thrilled that you're asking that first.
Yeah, they've become my favorite band, actually. I've always loved OK Computer and the Bends. But after OK Computer, I couldn't get into Kid A, and I didn't get into anything else until the 2020 shutdown. The 2020 shutdown, I got in Moonshaped Pool.
Okay.
And then I went backwards. It was one album after another. And Kid A, I kept going back to and kept trying, and I didn't like it. But in your book, you said the best music doesn't reveal itself on its first listen, but once you hear it, you'll never unhear it. And Kid A clicked one day, boom. And
yep. Yeah. I mean, I heard Kid A. I took my wife to Tower Records at midnight on the day it came out, so that we could be the first people to have it. And I was really like so happy to have it, but kind of horrified by the sound. It was so unusual, and like I loved it, but I hated it. And it took a couple of many listens before I was like, holy shit, this is like one of the most brilliant albums I've ever heard in my life. It's not OK Computer, but it's
Yeah.
really, quite extraordinary. So anyway, yeah. What do you like besides Moon Shaped Pool and the aforementioned? Like in that, between Kid A?
In Rainbows is becoming my favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so good. And I just got Kid A Amnesiac, their new vinyl release.
Oh, yeah.
My vinyl player's been broken, so I haven't listened to it till last night. I was like, finally got it fixed, and I put it on and listened to it. And of course, I already loved Kid A now, but it's really great. All the B-side stuff is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I have so much Radiohead on a hard drive, like all these bootlegs and whatever. But anyway, we can talk about that some other time, I guess.
Yeah, I just got a Radiohead live vinyl, but I wrapped it and put it under my tree for my wife and I. Was like, I'm not gonna just open it now. But so yeah, I was gonna ask you if OK Computer, is that still you think, because you were gonna impart some valuable life lessons to your daughter, and you said one of those lessons was OK Computer is the best album ever recorded. Is that still your opinion?
It really is. I mean, all these years later, it's my favorite album. I don't listen to it, like all day, every day, like I did when it came out. But when I look at my, I'm an Apple Music person, so it tracks like what you listen to most.
Mm-hmm.
And every year, when you go through, like they give you your list of top played songs or whatever, something from. There's always like, OK Computer in some order in the top, 20 basically. So yeah. I'm very loyal.
That's very cool. So yeah, so as soon as I was reading your book, I was like, this is the first thing I want to bring up. But I guess we should, especially for my listeners who aren't, some of them might not be Radiohead fans, we'll move on to, it's possible. I found out my bass player didn't like Radiohead one year. And
oh my God, really? That's not okay.
We argued about it for a long time. I think I got him to come around a little bit, but anyway, yeah, I want to get into to your book, because my podcast is the piece on drugs. It's about the drug war, but it's also about addiction. And I just did an opioid crisis special. And every time I read something, I hadn't read your book before I released that special, and I just read Carolyn Zorenstein's book on opium. And she's going to be on the podcast next week.
Okay.
And every time I read a book, I learn new things, the things that I would have changed in my opioid special. And I messaged her about this. Even though I'm already on the side of legalization, regulation, getting opiate addicts, heroin addicts access to heroin, I still always thought the best strategy is still sobriety, if that can be possible. But I'm learning that for some people it's not possible, and it's they're going to need something to medicate, and I don't see what's the big problem with that. Like what?
I totally agree. I mean, I think there's so many kind of bullshit thoughts that are baked into our collective conscious. I mean, we know you don't have to have tried cocaine and LSD to know that they're very different from alcohol and pot. Like every type of substance affects our neural pathways differently, but we have this idea, and kind of the AA-ism of a drug is a drug is a drug. So we know that like nobody wakes up in the morning and starts guzzling down vodka and functions all day. But there are millions of people all over the world who doctors prescribe opioids far more powerful than heroin, who not only can function on them, but need them specifically to function. So, heroin destroys lives and it's pure evil and all like that, but, somehow Dilaudid and so forth improve lives. So I think, there's definitely something to be said for pain. And if you can, look, I would love to not have to take something every day, but at this point, depression is a degenerative biological condition. If I had some kind of, chronic physical malady, it would be, very similar. And opioids, they work by flooding your brain with dopamine and serotonin and binding to your opiate receptors, which regulate physical pain and emotional well-being, which is, emotional pain. So they, whenever anybody says like, how can you take heroin for depression? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, heroin works for depression the same way that heroin works for if your foot got chopped off, and heroin is an opioid. So it's the same as OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocet, I have this conversation with people all the time. Like, remember when your dentist prescribed Vicodin after that root canal? Well, you know how heroin feels. It's like, well, I've had beer, but I can't imagine what, Scotch whiskey tastes like or feels like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this idea that, because one of your counselors is Nancy, she said heroin is pure evil and has no medical value. And
right.
And to me, it's like, well, that's the most ridiculous statement, especially for somebody who's in the medical field or the recovery field, because we know that it has medical value. And actually, most doctors would agree that opium is the most powerful medicine that the world has ever had for thousands of years.
Well, maybe other than penicillin, but I think an important distinction needs to be made about Nancy and most people in treatment, which is that Hazelden, it's different today than it was when I was there. But when the locus of care is Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a non-medical operation, and I should probably have a little disclaimer here that I would never discourage anybody from doing anything that works for them. I know a lot of people who have, AA they credit AA with saving their lives, but this is not, this is not science and medicine. I mean, they tell you explicitly to avoid, medicine. So Nancy has no medical credentials. She's just telling me what she thinks. And addiction has been so siloed off from science and medicine, certainly as long as anyone who is alive has been alive, and so we just kind of accept the idea that, like, in order to, this is the only medical condition where you've got medical experts without medical credentials, and they're pushing a cure that involves prayer, and avoiding science and medicine. I mean, if an oncologist were to have said, your cancer, you got to just join a support group, that's gonna, that's the answer. You stay away from that chemotherapy and surgery, though, because if you start to do that, you're gonna die. That's literally the definition of quack medicine. Medical experts without medical credentials pushing, magical thinking cures.
Yeah, I remember Doug Stanhope, the comedian, has a bit about that, about the Gary Busey and the show about what is it? The show is Intervention, when he's like, the end, at the final end is just God. That's your medical advice. He's like, what other? He's like, even your most Christian zealous friends, if they went to the hospital and the doctor came out and said, it looks like someone needs a higher power, that's not what they want to hear.
No, it's exactly. And the thing that's so interesting about, like, doctors who you go to medical school, they don't, like, drugs and addiction, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you know everything about everything. It's not taught for a very long time. And so I've met tons of doctors who just kind of accept the idea that, like, AA is the solution to addiction. It's kind of like just something that we think without even really thinking about. It's the brand, but for anything else, it would be preposterous. And people who are perfectly logical, rational people who would tell you, if you went to the doctor for, some obscure toenail fungus, and they were like, yeah, you got to just pray and join an anonymous support group, they'd be like, fuck you. Like, are you out of your mind? That's malpractice lawsuits, excuse me, all day long. But with this, it's just like, well, yeah, obviously that's the only thing, God hasn't been curing diseases since, like, the bubonic plague, but I guess he's good with this. I don't know.
Yeah. It's really frustrating. And my wife went through, has some alcohol addiction problems, and we went to AA, and I went with her, and it was very strange and cult-like, in my opinion. And again, though, like you said, if it works for people, I'm totally for people going if it works for them. I have no problem with it. But yeah,
it is a cult. There are a lot of kind of sayings like your buprenorphine is replacing one addiction with another. AA is replacing one addiction with another. I mean, there are AA chapters around the country that are being sued for basically shaming somebody out of taking buprenorphine or Wellbutrin or Prozac, antidepressants, who stopped taking the medication that was keeping them alive and functional, and these people committed suicide. I mean, there's a group in Syracuse, New York, that this just happened with over the past couple of years, and I mean, it's horrifying that that's going on. Like, and again, like I don't mean to judge anybody who takes that path. Like that's totally fine, but like telling somebody, you can't be taking Wellbutrin, you're not, completely clean, like while they're drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, is really just horrifying.
Yeah, it is. I just talked to an artist friend of mine the other day, and he was saying, because he did some speeches for AA, and I was going to ask him to be on the podcast, but he said he's done with the AA thing. He's like, it turned out to be so judgmental, and he said that because he was drinking Kratom, and they were like
drinking it.
Yeah, like they had Kratom. They have Kratom drinks down here. We have the kava bars and stuff.
Oh.
So he was drinking Kratom, and they just got onto him. They're like, you can't have Kratom, that's a drug. And he's like, I was a heroin addict for years, and heroin and crack. He's like, I don't think Kratom's my biggest problem. If I can stick with this, I feel like I'm fine. And they all had a big problem with him. And then he's like, then I go to the kava bar and I see one of the other guys there and won't even look at me because he's sitting there having a drink. So
wow.
But have you tried Kratom?
I haven't. I've heard mixed reviews about it. I know somebody who swears by it. I know other people who say it's a disaster and has all kinds of terrible effects on your neurotransmitters.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know one way or the other, and I certainly wouldn't judge anybody for whom it works. But I don't know.
It's a partial agonist to the opioid receptors, and I use it all the time. But I do have a problem with it becoming like, I'll have like withdrawals if I don't take it. So then
Really?
but it's not nearly as bad as, because I had a Vicodin addiction for a few years, and those withdrawals were far worse than Kratom. But still, the Kratom, I just wean myself off. I'm actually weaning off right now because for the new year I'm going to do a whole sober month in January. So I just want to do just something for me. But I do like Kratom, and I think it's helped a lot. A lot of addicts, it's helped because the DEA tried to outlaw it, and a lot of, especially ex-veterans who have PTSD or physical pain that they were treating with morphine derivative opiates, switched to Kratom, and they all marched on Washington, signed a petition, and the DEA actually reversed the ban. So that was good.
That is interesting. Have you tried buprenorphine at all, or methadone?
I've tried methadone, but not through the clinic. That was when I was young, and it was actually passed around as a recreational drug sometimes. But I've not tried Suboxone. But my Vicodin addiction, granted, I guess it was kind of bad, but I just, when I decided to quit, I just quit. I went through the withdrawals and it was fine. But one of my best friends he's a fentanyl addict, and he lives on Suboxone. But he relapses constantly because it does, I guess it doesn't give him the effect he really wants. But
do you have any idea how much Suboxone he takes?
I don't.
There's a lot of, fentanyl is a real game changer. And I mean, obviously nobody's studying every, single analog, but it's stored in your fat cells. It's lipophilic. So, that can wreak havoc for a very long time. And there's a lot of people out there that will tell you, with Suboxone or buprenorphine, less is more. Like nobody needs more than 8 milligrams, blah, blah, blah. I've been on it since 2008, and I take 20 milligrams a day, and nobody's going to shame me out of that. But I know a lot of people who need, 32 milligrams is the absolute ceiling dose, in the sense that like that it's maximum saturation of your receptors. And there's a lot of people out there who need 32 milligrams, and they're being told, you don't need that. And it's like, look, we all know our own bodies better than anybody else, but we're kind of led to believe that anybody who drug users are liars and you can't trust them and whatever, and so it's really tragic.
Yeah So thanks for that information. I'm going to call and talk to him about that. But us knowing our own bodies better, that brings me to that part where your counselor Ron, he found out he never had experienced addiction himself, and And he said his training has allowed him to understand addiction better than you as an addict. And that just really struck me as I mean, I understand doctors that will help treat addicts who have.
Hold on.
Go ahead. Yeah.
He's not a doctor.
Oh, he's not. He's just, he's a counselor.
No. Yeah. He's like, this is the entire, I mean, these guys in 46 states, you don't need any kind of medical credentials to be a counselor. So these experts, they're not doctors. I mean, you don't need to be a high school graduate in order to, in 46 states, you don't even need to have graduated from high school in order to be a counselor. Really? So Ron, I mean, these are just people. They're not and their training comes from these non-medical, approaches. So they will call themselves experts, and you'll believe them because you're there and they're in charge. But they truly, I mean, they're not qualified to diagnose, treat, or maintain any kind of medical condition or mental health condition. So, and addiction is a medical condition.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So yeah, I guess I just assume when I read counselor, I picture someone in a medical coat and assume that they're either a doctor or a nurse practitioner. Wow.
No, I mean, and the thing about Ron that at the time I was just so rip roaring mad that I couldn't, I didn't really have any perspective on it. But I mean, you have to imagine this is a guy who, grew up somewhere in Minnesota, and he needed to get a job. And I mean, I'm just kind of making this up and making assumptions. But I know that, he this is what he's done all his life. So whether he got out of high school and said, like, I'm going to go, this Hazelden pays better than McDonald's. Like, I don't know what the, driver was for his decision, but so he gets his job at Hazelden, and then they trained him. So everything that I'm saying to him plays into the narrative of, drug addicts are liars. They're in denial, blah, blah, blah. So like, I'm telling him, look, man, depression is the problem. And he's like, oh, that sounds like an excuse to me. If I went there and on the other hand, though, if it's hard to imagine if somebody showed up there and their, foot got chopped off and they were prescribed morphine, or they were taking the morphine before it, would anybody say like, oh, well, clearly your foot got chopped off because of the morphine and you're in pain because the morphine's causing the pain? The only way you're going to feel better is if you stop making excuses, and you stop taking the morphine, and you pray, and you go to a bunch of meetings with this anonymous support group, then your foot will feel better. And it's like, pain doesn't stop when we stop taking painkillers, it gets worse. And we know that. But for whatever reason, this is what these guys are taught. So like, I just played into the narrative.
Yeah. This idea that addicts are the addiction is the disease. It couldn't be an underlying thing that's causing you to want to feel better. It's
right. That's an excuse. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I had this conversation with at a speaking gig with some parents recently, and I was thinking, if when I was 16, instead of heroin, if I started, running, and I found that running was great for my depression, right? And so swap heroin with running. Like my problems are all solved with running, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's going to tell me, you got to stop running. You're making excuses and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, running and heroin are comparable, health-wise. Obviously running is, infinitely better for you, but everybody had, we all have coping mechanisms. And so, like this is what some people are doing to feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections. He talks about this, about the idea that we look at a building that's on fire and we think we can just, if we blow the smoke away, then the fire will go out. So, but you have to put the fire in the building out. And the smoke is the addiction. The fire is whatever is causing them to seek the drugs, which for some people it's schizophrenia. Heroin, or schizophrenics find heroin more comforting than any antipsychotic medicine. And most of them end up homeless because they're using heroin and they're schizophrenics. And that to me is just so awful.
Yeah. I mean, addiction is a symptom. People use drugs for a reason. I mean, the definition of, compulsive use despite negative consequences. It's like, the opioids, they're not instantly addictive. Like the compulsion to use drugs, despite negative consequences, is a compulsion to kill pain. I mean, they're painkillers. Like that's why people use them. All of these, I mean, my mom had cancer twice. She was prescribed all kinds of opioids. She didn't have a problem with it. She's a happy, well-adjusted person. I'm not. So, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely a symptom, and we look at it the exact opposite. I mean, the idea that addiction would be anybody's problem, like, nobody's problem is I can't stop pouring booze down my throat. It's I'm pouring booze down my throat to drown, some kind of problem. Not speaking personally, I got drunk once in my life, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I have used alcohol that way when I was younger and dealing with a lot. There was times you just drank to just forget who you were, and people from the outside, like some family members would be like, "Oh, I just like to party. I just want to party my life away." It's like, it wasn't a party for me. It wasn't fun.
No, I mean, and that's, it's like we lump everything together as recreational drugs, and we say recreational as if fun is a problem. But I mean, look, like when they were telling me in rehab that, or they told my mom that I was going to drink, hand sanitizer if I got desperate enough, because that's what we do. We abuse whatever can be abused, and it's like I understand why drinking, liquid soap is considered abuse, but like, painkillers are there to kill pain, and that's the draw. Like, I'm not so sure that there's a lot of recreational opioid use. I think everybody is using them to kill some kind of pain. It's just some of us don't have a prescription, and it's illegal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And honestly, I found when I got into Vicodin, I had always enjoyed opiates, the way they made me feel, but they made me feel more level than alcohol. Alcohol had its ups and downs. You might feel really great one minute, and then you don't feel, then you get mad. But opium gave me a very, just calm, relaxed, and level feeling.
I mean, I tried my lone experience with alcohol happened before I tried heroin, and I wanted to like it. I mean, I've always been kind of jealous of people who like drinking, because it was so horrifying for me. I mean, I don't like the feeling of being intoxicated, and I say that sometimes, and people are like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And it's I mean, look, I couldn't like stand up. I was throwing up. It was, I mean, that experience turned me off to alcohol for the rest of my life so far. And I can't imagine why I would do it again. But, opioids, they don't like fuck you up like that. I mean, it's not, I mean, you can, but, if you're taking them responsibly, if such a thing is possible, given the, laws, it's, I mean, again, there's people all over the world who are prescribed powerful opioids that, don't have a problem. We're not, thinking they're they can't function, and they're going to steal all your shit when you're not looking.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think too, because we're talking alcohol versus opioids, and I was reading Michael Pollan's newest book, and he talked about during Prohibition that all these groups, like one of them was like the Women's Christian Alliance or whatever they were called, but they would have, their symbol was the axe, and it was about cutting down the apple tree, because that men would use the apples to brew ciders, hard ciders. But they said that their drug of choice at the time was laudanum, that was available over the counter. So they were like, all anti-alcohol, alcohol is the devil, and then they would go to laudanum. So there's always been, even when like one drug's prohibited, the other one's available. And now we've switched. Basically, you said, well, alcohol is good to go. We're going to get all the opiates off the shelf. And I mean,
I mean, opium was in America before, the Declaration of Independence. I mean, during the Civil War, like in the mid 1800s until the turn of the 20th century, opioids were the default medication for everything, for physical pain and anxiety, amputation, whatever it may be. And so at around 1900, 1 in 200 Americans were addicted to opioids. Smoking opium had been outlawed starting in San Francisco because a bunch of white guys didn't like their white women sleeping with the Chinese dudes, and so we ended up making them available only by prescription for physical pain. And so I mean in the alcohol, however, it's like the the most dangerous substance you can put in your body. I mean, opioids kill you by shutting down your central nervous system, right? I mean, that's the damage they do, and they cause constipation, and there's certainly unwanted side effects, but they don't turn you into a lying criminal. But alcohol will shut down every organ in your body, and I mean, I certainly would have loved death more than withdrawal at any given moment, in heroin withdrawal. But alcohol withdrawal can actually kill you.
Exactly.
So it is more no other drug is that addictive. All other drugs combined can't cause, can't shut down all of your organs. So, alcohol, we accept that it's okay. And, it's infuriating. I mean, I'm happy that people who drink don't have to worry about, dying every time they, take a sip of something. I mean,
or being arrested for it, or
yeah. I mean, during Prohibition, I mean, alcohol fatalities surged during Prohibition because you don't know what you're getting, and that's the danger with drugs right now. I mean, the analogy that I always use is like, if I've got 2 pint glasses on the table, they're both alcohol, and one of them is, hard seltzer, like 2% hard seltzer, and the other one is methanol, right? So here's 2 pints of alcohol. Go ahead and drink one. If you don't know which is which, you've got a 50% chance of dying. So if you ask somebody like, would it be safer to know what's in the glass? Like, nobody in their right mind is going to tell you no, alcohol would be much safer if, it just, there was no ABV and all like that. And that's what's killing people, and people were dying during Prohibition for the same reason, and people would be dying today for the same reason. I mean, look, if I bought a bag of heroin from, I had one, I mean, there's an archaic stamp on the bag is not a quality assurance statement or consistency. The potency is always, inconsistent. I mean, overdose is an overly potent dose. So if you don't know how potent the dose is, you can't prevent overdose. And that's not the drug's fault. That's the law.
Exactly. And that's the opioid crisis that they call it, which I have a problem with that name, because it's not a problem of the opiates aren't the problem. And that phrase makes it sound like it is, but it's
it's the laws.
It's the laws. Exactly. It's the dosage problem. And everybody thinks, 100,000 people die from opiates. That's how horrible opiates are. So no, that's how horrible our regulation of them is, because opiates don't kill people in the hospital.
That's right. It's exactly, it's the regulation. I mean, and also we know, I mean, the overwhelming majority of overdose fatalities are from illicit drugs, because the inconsistent potency, you have no idea what you're putting in your body. I mean, it's like 96% of overdose is from illicit drugs. So, I mean, and it's like, I mean, my mom is kind of like a yardstick of sentiment for, America at large. And the idea that, like, the drug war is obviously failing. Everybody knows that. Nobody can think of a single good thing to say about it. I mean, look, lawmakers would be jumping up and down telling us how great it was if they could think of anything good to say. So clearly it's, a catastrophic failure. And everybody also is aware, like, when they really stop and think about it, like, are legal regulated substances safer than I have no fucking idea what I'm putting in my body? I mean, obviously they are. But it's like we're more horrified by the idea of people using legal regulated drugs safely than the idea of people dying from the illegal drugs.
Isn't that crazy?
It's really, look, fear is irrational. And it's not a rational conversation. It's a conversation about fear. It's like, when you ask the average person, should we legalize drugs? What they hear is, should we make meth available for babies and stick it in their jugular veins so that they get addicted, immediately? Everybody's afraid the drug use is going to increase if we legalize and regulated drugs. And, so the next question is, all right, well, is it safer with less people die? Sure, absolutely. Nobody's going to argue with that. All right, so the legalization leads to widespread use, right? Did you load up on beer every time you go to the gas station? No. Well, why not? I'm I'm a bad example. All right, so then you must be totally psyched about the idea of meth and heroin being legal, right? No, why would I, oh my God, I wouldn't use that stuff. I wouldn't go near that stuff. Well, then you must know a lot of people who do. No, and it's like they make the argument for you.
Yeah.
If you don't want to legalize drugs because you think the whole world is going to start using, and you can't name one fucking person you think is going to start using these drugs, then fuck you. I mean, you're fucking killing people.
Exactly. And I mean, the idea that we're gonna, if we legalize and regulate, that we're just gonna say, all right, meth's now available at Walgreens, go get some. It's not going to be like that. We have a way to regulate it safely, and people that's their drug that they need, it helps them out, they can go talk to a doctor, and it's between them and their doctor.
Disagree. Sorry. We should have drugs in drugstores the way that we have alcohol in liquor stores. I mean,
you mean over the counter?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why you can walk into, I mean, look, my wife likes, wine and champagne every now and again. We have people over who drink sometimes. So I go to the liquor store. I could buy all kinds of booze, no problem. That is, lethal amounts of anything. But I can't walk into the drug equivalent of that. Like, why not? I mean, really, why wouldn't we do that?
That is a good point. And I brought that up, that I know I'm a hypocrite for saying I don't think alcohol should be more heavily regulated, but I also think heroin shouldn't be as available, because on a danger scale, alcohol is actually more dangerous. So it's just, I think it's just a hard pill for even me to swallow, I guess, just the idea that heroin, you just go and you buy it. But
but if we I think what it comes down to is better. I mean, look, we look at the war of drugs and drug laws as if they're preventative programs, and they're really not. Like, it's interdiction, so if we had better, and the idea that well, you chose to stick needles in your arm and all that, like we do the best that we can with the choices we have at the time. I wish that I felt like I had better choices. I didn't. I wish that there was some kind of better, when we talk about prevention, just say no is not prevention, because the least likely person to say no to a painkiller is the kid who's desperately in pain with tons and tons of shame and no resources to take care of it. So why don't we try actual prevention and resources to guide people away from drugs? And if you want to use drugs, we make them available. I mean, alcohol, if we're not going to restrict alcohol more and make you go to a doctor to get whatever kind of booze you want, then it's hypocritical to, I get the difference from one substance to the next. I mean, we were just talking about that. I can't see, I don't like stimulants. I don't see the appeal of them. I think, I've certainly been around people who get really, angry when they're on that stuff. But if that's your thing, then, you should be able to get that, because there's bar fights and people drive into trees and all kinds of, terrible stuff happens. We need, if we're going to trust you with alcohol, we've got to trust you with the other stuff. And we just need better prevention programs. The other thing is, we spend $48 billion a year on the drug war, on interdiction. If we were to end the drug war, legalize and regulate all drugs, and tax and sell them like alcohol, it would be $108 billion annual net swing. That's a lot of money for treatment and all kinds of other things.
That's actually a really good point, because the idea is that if we have the treatment available, then, and like you said, we are treat us like adults. If you're an adult and you make the decision to go buy a bottle of alcohol, who's the government to say, well, I don't want to do alcohol, I'd rather take a Oxycontin or something like that.
And that's fine. Like, again, like nobody's drinking, vodka at 7:00 in the morning and functioning all day. There's millions of people who can do that with opioids. And I realize we're talking about alcohol and opioids, and there's all kinds of other stuff. I mean, look, if somebody wants to take LSD every day, I don't really see that happening.
It happens with microdosing LSD, and I tried it, and actually it worked for a while with my depression.
Really?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's funny you should say that. I've never taken a hallucinogen. I've been terrified of them since the DARE assembly in 5th grade that got me interested in heroin. I've been following all of the microdosing and all that. And I read this amazing article about somebody's experience with LSD when they were older. I'm 45 now. So, I kind of wonder what I'm missing out on. But I mean, you didn't like hallucinate though when you were on.
No, not a micro. I was taking a fourth of a paper hit, so I felt it. It wasn't like a lot of microdoses take even a super small amount. I took enough to where I felt it. I felt the energy. Everything looked a little brighter, but I was not tripping or having a trip. But no, I also do that. I do a mushroom trip probably about 2 or 3 times a year, and I do mushrooms only because the LSD now is not LSD. A lot of it on the streets because of
Really?
the war on drugs. There's N-bomb is one of the chemicals, which I've probably done because back when I was doing LSD, I didn't even know that was a thing, but I've been reading a lot about it. And I felt last time I did LSD, it felt weird. It didn't feel the same.
What's the chemical? What did you say? What was that chemical?
It's called N-bomb, which is a weird name, but it's I think I'm not exactly sure, but it's one of these chemicals that they make in the labs in China that they are able to sell. And it's interesting because in places like Spain, they have drug testing. The government actually tests drugs because it's not legal, but it's decriminalized. And because of this, there's LSD, there's MDMA. If you buy street drugs, there's 90% chance that they're pure because of the testing. Here, it's the opposite.
Right. I mean, that's exactly the problem. I mean, there was this Sam Quinones had this article recently. I mean, we all know what's happening with the fentanyl analogs, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense if you think about the explosion of highly potent, lethally potent synthetic opioid analogs. Because I mean, look, if you're in any distribution model, if you drive a tractor trailer truck, right, and you can drive around barrels of orange juice that you make 2% per barrel, or these teeny tiny little things of gourmet orange juice with a 75% markup, what are you gonna drive around in your tractor trailer? You're gonna pick the orange juice, right? So if orange juice was illegal, you'd want, you still want the high value, high margin, low volume combination. So it makes perfect sense that when you're selling an illegal product, you would want it to take up as little space as possible with the most bang for your buck.
Exactly. It's the iron law of prohibition.
Right. And it's like, I mean, the DEA, like, did you see their one pill can kill campaign that came out a few weeks ago?
No.
I mean, like these motherfuckers, I mean, so they they say counterfeit pills have never been more deadly. One pill can kill. It's a massive problem, and it started a couple of years ago. They don't mention that it happened to have this problem began when they restricted prescription opioids to the absolute max. So it's like it's supply and demand, and we know that. The cartels, so they're blaming the cartels for the counterfeit pills, and like obviously the cartels are drug traffickers are bringing them into the country, but would anybody be interested in buying, I have no idea what this is, and it might kill me, if you could get, I know what I'm talking about, the real, actual, pure, whatever it is that you're looking for cheaper? I mean, who's going to do that? Who's going to buy some, toxic fentanyl when they can buy something that they know exactly what it is for a fraction of the price?
Exactly. And that's the problem. If people could get, like, because there's Xanax bars being sold that have fentanyl because they're counterfeit.
They're killing people.
Exactly. If people could just go to the pharmacy and say, I need some Xanax, and they get ID'd, you're over 18, here's your Xanax, then they're not going to go buy it from somebody and
Exactly.
That's so ridiculous.
I mean,
that's what killed Prince and Tom Petty, both of them.
The DEA is responsible for, I mean, when you read this thing, like, if you look up involuntary manslaughter, it's defined as like, an act of death caused by recklessness, or death could be reasonably foreseen by, negligence, or, failing to whatever. But that's what they're doing. I mean, they know, I mean, they say in this thing, the only safe drugs, the only safe pills are dispensed at pharmacies. So they're acknowledging that the legal regulated opioids are the only safe pills, but they won't let you have them. And so now you've got these pills that are killing people, and they can't stop them. So, I mean,
yeah.
What are these guys doing? I mean, it's like, they're in charge of a community pool, and drowning deaths, double every couple of years. And we're like, oh, well, we better, increase your budget and tell people just say no to swimming.
Yeah, it's absolutely just awful. 100,000 people over 12 months, and when I read the story in the news when that number came out, and not one person, not one of these major news articles were talking about the real problem there. They were just saying that how bad the opiates are with the fentanyl crisis and all these things, but nobody's mentioning how do we fix this? And the answer is so easy. You have to legalize and regulate.
We could solve this problem. I mean, right now, like just make the pharmaceutical drugs available. It would solve the problem right now. I mean, I remember in the 90s when there's always this kind of worst case scenario fear with the drug war, where it's like if the drug war ended, I remember hearing lawmakers talking about how there could be as many as 10,000 drug deaths every year if the drug war ended. And it's like, the drug war is the worst case scenario. Yeah. And the idea that people, you have conversations with people who intellectually understand that it's safer to use legal regulated drugs. They understand that overdose fatalities, there would be a hell of a lot less. People die from alcohol overdose. People are going to die from drug overdose too. But it's objectively, indisputably safer. So anybody who wants to, unless you want to make, alcohol and caffeine and nicotine and everything else illegal, like one of those kinds of people, which I disagree, but if that's your thing, that's fine. I mean, they're complicit in all of these deaths. I mean, I just don't understand how, we don't want people to use drugs. That's fine. If you don't want somebody to use drugs and you can't stop them from using drugs, because look, people have been using drugs longer than written language. And I think we all know that laws don't stop behavior. I mean, nobody wants to go out and murder somebody and they're like, oh my God, well, murder's illegal. I guess I better not do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you don't want somebody to use drugs. You beg them, not to, and they're going to use them anyway. What do you think's going to happen if they use, they're going to fucking die? Why wouldn't you want them to be safe? I just don't understand why anybody would have a problem with that.
Well, especially when the reality is anybody can buy drugs anytime they want. It's just they don't know what they're getting, but they can buy them. Right. It's just they might kill them. So this idea that we don't want people to be able to buy them at Walgreens, but we know they can buy them, around the corner.
Yeah, and if think caffeine. If caffeine was under the same restrictions as opioids, right? So you couldn't get safe caffeine, and 300 people were dying every day from lethally powerful caffeine. Everybody would know how to solve this problem. Nobody would want caffeine to be illegal. Everybody understands that. But when you swap caffeine with opioids, it's like, oh my God, we can't possibly do that, because we see the problems that the overdose deaths and everything else that we want to pin it, the crime and the people are terrible and blah 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 blah. Of course we lie about our drug use. I mean, I lied because I was ashamed, not because not like you asked me what I had for breakfast and I'm not going to make up some bullshit. We hide the things that we're ashamed of, and so that drives so much behavior underground. I mean, the laws are the problem. I mean, drug laws are deadlier than any drug.
Completely agree. I mean, and that's what drove my friend to fentanyl. Was he got addicted to the Oxycontin, and that was his drug of choice, and he was highly functional. I didn't even know he was ever on it. He didn't tell me he had a problem until they cut the Oxycontin supply, and all of a sudden he was scrambling for what he was going to do, and then he found fentanyl. And I can tell it's taking a toll on him. It's not the same drug as the Oxycontin, which was working totally fine with him.
Yeah, I mean, even the different. I mean, heroin in the 90s. I mean, I was able to get away with it for so long because everybody thinks it's this crazy hardcore drug and nobody can function on it. And the reason people think that is because people like me don't go around saying hello, I'm on heroin. I thought you should know because I know you think that you can't function on it, but please don't tell anybody or call the police because, as you know, it's illegal and blah, 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 So it just perpetuates these stereotypes. I mean, I had this situation at work when I was, right out of college. I was wearing a white button-down shirt, and I shot up in the bathroom, went to a meeting, and there was blood, collecting on my inside of my elbow, and I didn't see it. And one of my coworkers said, are you bleeding? And I was like, yeah, I just shot up in the bathroom, and everybody laughed.
So you just were honest, and they just thought it was a funny joke, and you were able to keep going.
Because right, but I was the guy who got made fun of for being so straight-laced. I didn't smoke pot, I didn't drink, so everybody thought I was some kind of goody two-shoes.
Meanwhile, you're sneaking off to the bathroom to shoot heroin, and it is, and it was like you say, you were highly functional. I mean, it didn't.
Yes.
And I remember when I was in my 20s, I was waiting tables at this restaurant with my friend, and he had some black tar heroin, and we actually got into it I did it for probably a few months, where it wasn't every day, but we would go back behind the dumpster at work and smoke heroin, and then go wait tables. And I just felt great. It gave me energy. Nobody ever knew that we were doing that. And I never got addicted. This idea that one hit and you're hooked is like, no, I never even had developed a withdrawal thing from it.
I mean, like, we know that alcohol isn't a problem for like 90-something% of people who drink, but we think that any drug use at all is a problem for 100% of people who use drugs.
Mm-hmm. And it's not the biggest problem is where you're getting it and what you might be doing. Like, my buddy ended up injecting it. He ended up getting an addiction, but he got on Suboxone, and then he even quit that. But the doctor said, he's like, well, like, you're lucky you didn't have more problems because you've been injecting garbage into your veins. And it's like, it really sucks people have to do that. I mean,
it's horrifying.
And that reminds me of the story you had in your book when you were taking the Darvas from your grandparents. You took just a few, and I had the same experience when I had my addiction. If somebody, like a family member, if I found out they had like some Vicodin or Percocet, I would take just one or two. But this also goes against the theory of addiction. Like, if you're an addict, you're taking the whole thing, because you can't stop yourself, but you do have some self-control.
I mean, there are people who do that, and I understand that, but that's the extreme minority. But we make that assumption that that's what everybody is. I mean, like, if heroin was legal, I think anybody would describe my use as dependence, not addiction. And there is a distinction. And so people who have actual acute full-blown addiction, that's what is treated in rehab, and that's not everybody. Like, that's scant few of the people who are actually treated, but that's what we freak out about. Well, oh my God, they're on drugs, we got to do something about it right now, you got to stop.
Yeah, because you have a dependence. That'd be like if somebody takes their SSRI medication for depression. We don't look at them like, look, you have a problem, you take it every day. It's like, well, I need it every day. And that could be the same with an opiate. Some people need it every day.
I mean, look, like alcohol, it's not prescribed. There's no medical use for it today. Opioids are. So it's like everything that we know about the biological mechanics of opioids and how they work, and nobody's like, oh my God, grandma, she hurt her back again and she's on OxyContin, so you got to watch out because she stole your VCR. Like that. Nobody has that thought. So it's like our perception of, we know that opioids kill pain. We know that's all they do. That's all they're prescribed for. Like, that's their purpose, right? But we think things about illicit use that is the exact opposite of everything we know about legal use.
And what is their big problem? The big problem is they don't want people to get high. If people are enjoying the way they feel, they have a problem with this.
We don't like that. We moralize. I mean, think about like the things that we moralize most. I mean, it's sex and drugs, and I understand that sex and drugs are a problem for some people. But in my experience, those are the two things that feel good every time. And like, those are the things that you're supposed to feel, the shittiest about. Like, this is immoral behavior, and
that's our puritanical roots in this country. And I can't remember who said the quote, but they said Puritanism is the horrifying fear that somebody somewhere is having a good time, something like that.
That's exactly right. It's like, I mean, people are using drugs to feel better. I mean, and it's like, well, drugs and medicine are, it's like it's the same substance. People are just treating themselves. I mean, I have been meeting a lot of people who are using meth or cocaine, and they talk about how they had ADHD, it was undiagnosed, and it worked for them. and so that's why those people are attracted to that stuff. People like me who are depressed they're attracted to opioids. I mean, we're killing pain.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I've always had a problem with depression. I think psychedelics have really helped me out, but also opiates have helped me out a lot. And I think that there was a time in my life when I needed them more than I do now, but I still use Kratom, so it's still technically an opiate. I just like what's up, why would people have a problem with that? If you want, like you said, if all of a sudden I'm stealing my neighbor's car to, whatever, none of that's happening, and it doesn't happen with most people.
And it wouldn't happen, or it would be a lot less common if it was, legalization and regulation is going to drive the price down. It's going to make everybody safer. The behavior can come out from hiding. I mean, if people could just go out and buy heroin the way that you buy Wellbutrin, except, you can get it on your own. I mean, it's, that's what's causing the problems.
Yeah, well, in Switzerland, they have legal access to heroin now, and they said that for heroin addicts are 55% less likely to steal, 85% less likely to steal a car, and 95% less likely for violent crime. It's the numbers are there.
The numbers are there with everything. And, for me, I didn't talk about this stuff until a couple of years ago. I mean, this was all a big secret, but my, how I look at my perception of things, this is how it's always been for me. So I can't understand how someone can see the facts. The numbers are there. I mean, in Portugal, the numbers are there for everything, and people are aware of that, but they're just like, nah, I don't know about that. It's like we're denying reality.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it's the big drug. It's like a drug war machine that we've created that doesn't want it to go away.
Yeah, I mean, we know the drug war failed, and we're afraid to stop it because we think everybody's going to start using drugs, even though we know that it's safer, and we don't know anybody who's going to start using drugs.
Exactly. The people that are going to use them are mostly the people that are using them right now, but they're using them in a very dangerous circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
I wanted to ask you about the time in your book you bought the dried poppies from that store.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Because I just got done with the Michael Pollan book I was talking about. And he talked about making the poppy tea from his garden and finding out that it's actually illegal to do that.
Yep. It's a great essay.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I was curious how you enjoyed it, because you said it was milder, but it lasted longer.
Yeah, it was really nice. I mean, if you listen to the DEA, there's one kind of opium poppy in the world, and it doesn't grow in the United States. And, that's just not true. There's many, many, many kinds of opium poppies. And so I can't remember exactly, where these came from. They were not Popov or somniferum. So I don't know if there's stronger poppies. I mean, I know that you probably can't buy poppies anywhere anymore.
You can't, no.
Yeah. I mean, and even, poppy seeds were going to be outlawed. They were talking about outlawing them a couple of years ago. So I, loaded up on poppy seeds just in case. But it was, I mean, it really did the trick. It lasted for a very, very long time. I mean, you have to remember that I had, no tolerance at the time and hadn't had any drugs in my system in a while. So I'm sure that if I was on, a person who's on fentanyl is not going to feel, anything from poppy seed.
Right.
But if I could, if I had access to that every day, that would have been fine. It was totally fine.
Yeah, I think I would enjoy that. And after doing my opioid special, I was really I really want to get some opium and just try some opium tea. And it's just impossible to find. I mean, I'm sure if I knew how to go online, the dark web, I could probably find it, because there's a person I'm reading about now that actually gets opium delivered that way, which would be awesome. Just to
opium,
have
actual opium?
Actual opium, which I haven't seen. I smoked when I was probably 18 years old. Was the last time I saw that. It's about 20 years ago.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever smoked opium. But Michael Pollan's article, it's, the DEA will tell you that you need a, PhD in horticulture and botany, and
right.
It's impossible. I mean, their website had this picture of the caption was Afghan cavemen making heroin, right? So it's like a guy stirring a rusty barrel with an oar, right?
Mhm.
But they're telling you like it's impossible. You need a lab and a thing, and you need a doctor and all this crap, a chemist, in order to make it. But I think I mean, I don't speak from experience, but based on Michael Pollan's article and everything else that I've read and heard, it seems like we could also solve this problem by just letting people plant poppies and making their own opium and whatever. There's a
Yeah.
solution. The rural areas that are hit so hard, their farmland, make fields of poppies.
Well, and it's a shame the DEA actually was funding these, the Mexican government for their drug war, and they're burning down fields and fields of poppies,
Yeah.
which is pushing the cartels to just move towards fentanyl. And the DEA themselves predict that in the next 10 years, there won't be any heroin at all. It'll all be fentanyl.
And I mean, they did that in Colombia with cocaine many years ago. I remember reading this thing about they basically bribed farmers to stop growing coca and start growing asparagus, right? And they're like, you're going to sell so much asparagus to the United States, like you won't know what to do with yourself. So, and it was true for a moment, but what do you think happens when, not all of Colombia, but when asparagus starts flooding the market, it drives the price down. So the DEA drove all of these farmers out of business because they were making money on asparagus for 5 minutes. And then competition got so steep and there was tons and tons of asparagus. So the price went, way the fuck down. What the fuck do we think we are going into other countries and telling them what to do?
Yeah. And that's been what our country's been doing for years, all the problems south of the border. I mean, our governments went down there and messed with those countries over and over again. And
we're murdering. I mean, we are destroy. Like the DEA has destroyed. So these guys think drug users belong in jail. I mean, they should all be in jail.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
In 1971, when we started the drug war, right, which we've spent $1 trillion on, and millions of lives have been lost and destroyed. If we were to have lit, $500 billion on fire and killed 1 million people, we'd be ahead right now. And obviously legalized and regulated drugs instead. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
that's
100%. And when Reagan started it in this version of the drug war, and it was like 82, they said that we would be 100% drug free by 1995. That was their bold prediction.
Yes, and it was around 1995 when they were predicting 10,000 people. Drugs would kill 10,000 people a year, if not for the drug war. And that sounded, like hyperbole back then. But you can find clips and speeches of the lawmakers who made those speeches back then. What do they have to say for themselves now? Yeah,
100,000 died this year. And it's because of the drug war. It's so frustrating that people don't see this. I have people message me on social media about when they see my podcast. They're like, I had a friend that died from a drug overdose and it ruined my brother's life. It's like, all that happened under prohibition. People don't understand this.
They don't. And it's, the other thing is that the safe injection sites and the methadone clinics, like all of these things that only exist because of what the dangers that drug laws create, right? So the people who don't want to legalize drugs are the same people that are telling you, we don't need, I don't want a safe injection site in my neighborhood. I don't want a methadone clinic in my neighborhood. Safe injection sites in the history of the world, every safe injection site anywhere since the dawn of time, nobody has died. There's been no overdose fatalities. That's a pretty compelling number, right? Mm-hmm. And these guys are like, I don't know if they're so, necessary. It's like, okay, well, great. And with methadone, it's like, you don't want a methadone clinic in your neighborhood. I mean, I don't want a methadone clinic in my neighborhood either, because it can get it at the fucking pharmacy. Like if a doctor prescribes methadone for somebody's knee pain, they can fill it at the pharmacy. If I'm prescribed methadone for opioid addiction, I have to go to a fucking clinic every day and pee in a cup. Like, you can get toxic fentanyl delivered to your house in under 24 hours. But you need to go to a methadone clinic every day. I mean, single parents, people who can't go to work late or can't leave their house at 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, there's nothing normal about that kind of life.
No, and the rules that they have and the way that they make these people feel at the clinics. My buddy dated a girl that was a heroin addict, and he would every morning drive her to the clinic at like, hey, she had to be there before 9 a.m. where they closed the doors on her, and said there was a few mornings they overslept, and she would like, I need you to take me down to this other neighborhood, then I got to get something else. And why are they closing the doors at 9 a.m. on these people?
And the other, like, I call methadone clinics. I mean, I haven't lately, but like every few months I would just kind of call random clinics around the country and find out, how long is the wait list and blah, blah, blah. I signed up for a couple of wait lists just to see what would happen. I'm on a wait list now that I've been on for 17 or 18 months, and another one that I've been on for 16 months. I mean, and the idea of like take homes. I mean, I always ask the question of like, I lay out my situation minus the buprenorphine, but it's basically like, I've got 2 kids. I need to get them ready for school. I have things to do and obligations, and I'm a responsible parent. I can't get to your clinic every day. I can promise you that I'm not going to use other drugs. And if you want to come here, I will pee in a cup, every 5 minutes if you like. But I can't get there. Can you help me out? Because I'm going to die if you, I'm worried about dying, and, fentanyl is so bad, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, no, we can't help you out. It's, whatever. And it's like, these guys are, they're contributing to the problem.
They are. Yeah.
It's the laws are driving the stigma, and it's the stigma and laws that, that's what makes life unmanageable. That's what is destroying lives and killing people right now.
It is. And it just goes back to the idea they don't want people to get high. But I mean, if heroin, what is Dr. Carl Hart said, it's like, who would have thought heroin's a good cure for or a good, not cure, but
it is the cure.
Yeah, but for heroin addicts, it treats them. It's a good treatment for heroin addiction, is giving them heroin. Yeah,
I mean, there were a bunch of studies in the 1914, the Harrison Act, that made opioids illegal except by prescription for physical pain. And there were a lot of doctors who, addiction was thought to be an incurable moral defect at the time, but there were a lot of doctors who were sympathetic. So they opened up, heroin clinics, for lack of a better description. And they found, it was very successful. It worked. Obviously it worked. But then those guys started getting shut down and sent to jail and whatever. And it's like, I mean, some compassion would, it's like, if you want to hate something, why don't you hate the problems or the things that drive people to use drugs and the problems that the laws create? Like, don't hate drug users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just talking to Claire Zagorski, and she said that, they have these safe injection sites in Texas, but they're all illegal. So right. You have people putting their jobs and careers on the line and potential jail time to help people because they know it's going to save lives. I mean,
we don't want people to, look, every life-saving, harm-reducing resource is, restricted and criminalized and stigmatized, and everybody knows that we can't stop fentanyl from, pouring in. So as long as the poison is easier to get than the antidote, I don't know who we're kidding here.
Yeah, and you just said the word harm reduction. I didn't realize that harm reduction is like a taboo word in politics and stuff. Like she said, she's told don't use the word harm reduction when you give this speech or when you give this talk. The word harm reduction is this really, really bizarre.
It is, and the thing that's so horrifying about the attitude for me at least is like nobody has a problem with the idea of reducing harm, right? Like bike helmets, seatbelts, those little plastic doodads that you put in electrical sockets so babies don't electrocute themselves, and so forth. Like everybody understands the purpose of gun locks, no problem. But the idea of reducing harm for drug users, it's like, why would we do that? Like, that's just crazy. We're enabling and, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I put those things in my electrical sockets when my kids were babies, and it wasn't to encourage them to electrocute themselves. It was to reduce harm. It was, preventative. It's like, so these concepts, if laws are meant to protect us and lawmakers' job is to make laws, it's really hard to imagine how any lawmaker can have a problem with the idea of reducing harm.
It is. It is an idea that we're enabling them if we make it safer and easier for them to access drugs. But it's like, what are we enabling them to self-medicate something like depression or something they're going through? We're enabling them to do it safer.
We're enabling them to not die.
Yeah.
And that, like, that needs to be more important than this crazy fucking approach to prevention that we think we're doing. As long as we, it's like people want to prevent drug use, and they're not even thinking that, like, they're rejecting the solutions to this problem by doing so. No, we don't want a safe supply of drugs. Like that would be crazy. Well, it would solve the, like, massive fucking problem of people dying all the time. Yeah, but more people might use drugs. We can't have that. And none of these people, it's like, well, how is this going to end without a safe supply of drugs? People are dying from the illicit drugs, and you know why. So what kind of solution do you propose here? Like, what's working? Has anything worked? No.
Exactly. And we can look at other countries and see what is working, but we just refuse to do that.
No, people might use drugs. People might also not die. How about that?
Yeah. And people are using drugs. Clearly, prohibition is not stopping them from doing it.
It's right. I mean, clearly, if the drug war had, been a preventing drug use, then nobody would be on drugs right now.
Yep. We wouldn't have had 100,000 people dead either. All those deaths are on the DEA's hands and the drug war's hands.
You're absolutely right. I mean, yeah.
Reminds me of that commercial, that the anti-tobacco campaign where they started dropping body bags in front of the tobacco buildings. I feel like we should do that at the DEA.
I mean, we should, it's like, it's a very simple equation. Make drugs safer, less people will die. Don't make drugs safer, more people will die. Like, pick one, Yep. It's not, when you start talking about, like, oh, well, if we make drugs safer and we make them available, then people are going to use them, blah, blah, blah. No, it's this. Do you want more people to die, or do you want less people to die? Do you think drugs would be safer if they were safer in a safe supply of legal regulated drugs? I mean, this is clearly the most dangerous that it could possibly be in any form. Like, nothing is more dangerous when it's legal and regulated. Like nothing,
Mm-hmm.
We have these, like, there's some cheeses that are illegal in the United States because of I was reading about some Sardinian cheese that has, like, maggots in it, and they perforate your organs or something like that. And it's like, would you want to just, if you could just buy for cheese and there were maggots in it that perforated your organs, do you feel safer knowing cheese is regulated and so forth? Like, I mean, everybody, it's like, I find in these conversations, because fear is irrational, it's not a rational conversation, you really have to take drugs out of the conversation, and you have to swap out something else, in the cheese or the caffeine or, any kind of substitute. People can actually, have that kind of conversation who couldn't otherwise when it's about drugs. Yeah,
I agree, because the drug campaign or the anti-drug propaganda is just really brainwashed people. People just, decades and decades of, and I was talking about it last week, that me and Claire were talking about, we think that actually cannabis might end up being a gateway into opening people's mind about the drug propaganda and changing people's minds, because you have a lot of elderly people that are now going and getting their marijuana prescriptions because they actually are benefiting from the drug, and they're realizing they've been lied to.
Yes. I mean, the other thing that I'm seeing in my, one horse town is there was the idea of, should we have a pot store in town, or dispensary, whatever they're called. Mm-hmm. And there was, like, a town hall meeting, or a bunch of them, I guess. And people were saying, like, we can't do that. Kids are going to, the usual fear of what people think without really thinking about it. And it's like, we have 3 liquor stores in this town. If we didn't have 3 liquor stores in this town, do you think nobody would drink? Yeah. Would they go someplace else to get alcohol, or would they be like, well, shit, I guess I'm not drinking because there's no liquor store in the fucking town?
Exactly. And also, which drug do you think is probably easier for a teenager to get? It's probably going to be the cannabis that's sold illegally versus the liquor sold at the store.
Well, right. But also, my daughter, she's going to be 16 tomorrow. So she's at that age where, kids are starting to experiment. And I know a lot of parents who are like, I'm worried about pot, just because it's legal now, it's still a drug and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know what? I would be fucking ecstatic if Ruby never went near alcohol and only smoked pot. I mean, I hope that she doesn't do anything, but I know that I can't stop her. And I'm aware that if she had to pick one, I know which one is safer. You know, nobody's ever died of a pot overdose.
Yeah.
You know, it's not physically addictive. I mean,
It's not causing cirrhosis of the liver or heart disease or cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, maybe possibly lung cancer, but anyway, it's definitely a much safer drug. And I find when I'm in a better place in my life, I'm not drinking much and I'm smoking more pot. But for me, smoking more pot means, you know, I a few hits in the morning to get up and get moving, go to the gym. It makes my day a little better.
You know, I was never a big pothead. I smoked pot. It's got to be like 15 years ago. Was the last time, and it was like I was kind of excited about it, like we're gonna watch Cheech and Chong and, you know, get some Twinkies or whatever, and I fell asleep. I took like one hit and fell asleep. So the idea of waking up and smoking pot, like I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it does everybody differently. I have a friend that wakes up and smokes a whole joint, and then an hour later he smokes another one, and that's just how he chooses to live his life.
But if you do that every day, like my friends in college used to say, you know, I smoked pot a few times in college, and I remember this guy Josh saying, you get too fucked up, and you get fucked up too fast because you don't do it every day. If you did it every day, this wouldn't happen. You got to train for it. You got to power through. And I'm like, you know.
Yeah, I think building up a tolerance like that just ends up costing a lot of money. To me, it's like keep my tolerance low, then I only have to take 2 or 3 hits and I'm good to go.
Yeah, I mean the pricing though, like I live in New York and it's legal here now, but apparently the you know, really pot that people actually like to smoke is that like actually gets you stoned is that you still can't, you know, buy it over the counter or whatever. But the gas station that I go to had pot a couple of months ago, and I saw it and I was like, holy shit, I've got to buy this pot. Like, you know, how could I not? It's in a plastic thing, it's like sealed with plastic, like this is, you know, how could I not do this? I had no intention of smoking it and I haven't, but you know, it seemed like the right thing to do. And it's like, it looks like it's like thousands of dollars worth of, you know, pot from 1992 in there. But you know, it's so much cheaper and it's obviously safer. And I don't know, I tried to give it to a guy I know who is a big pot smoker, and he said, "Oh no, it's Delta 10. That's not, you know, I don't go near that stuff because it doesn't do anything to you."
Oh, it's Delta 8.
Oh, Delta 8.
Yeah, that's what they sell at the gas stations. That's what I was thinking. And honestly, Delta 8 didn't do much for me either, but I've heard they've been making it, they've been growing it stronger because it's legal in most places with that haven't even legalized cannabis. They can sell Delta 8 legally. I think Texas just is trying to outlaw it. But
yeah, I mean, you know, the other thing that people don't think about is pot. You know, people used to say, you know, in the 90s, it was like, well, this isn't like the pot in the 60s. And I don't know what they're, you know, saying today, but it gets stronger and more potent because it's driven underground. So they have to make it stronger so that it's more concentrated. I mean, it's the same thing with the opioids, you know, the fentanyl, gives rise to fentanyl. And with, you know, I mean, I feel like the DEA like invited people to start trafficking cocaine and heroin when they put pot in the same schedule as cocaine and heroin, because, you know, again, if you're smuggling drugs, do you want to have the small thing that doesn't have a smell, or, you know, a giant bushels of stinky pot? You know.
Yeah, especially if they're the same charge if you get caught.
Yeah, and the weight. I mean, you know, like, come on, you've got 1 billion pounds of pot that's not going to harm anybody, and you're going to be in jail for the same. You know, it's the same kind of crime as if you had that exact weight in heroin, and I think the heroin is probably, you know, 1 bajillion times more valuable than the pot. So
that's true. The DA definitely, and now they basically they need the drugs to continue to come in because they need to be able to keep fighting them. So the DA, if you think about it, they never ever had a motive to win the drug war, because then they wouldn't exist.
They're out of business if they drive the cartels out of business. I mean, you know, they absolutely need them. They would have nothing to do with themselves all day. I mean, you know, and that's why, like, it's a taxpayer-funded program that's driven by fear. So they love, they're not in a hurry to walk back the, fentanyl exposure lies that they've been spreading. I mean, look, everybody has seen, cops in like warehouses full of cocaine and heroin, and nobody thinks like, oh my God, you better get out of that warehouse, you're going to die. And everybody knows that people are using illicit fentanyl and dying, but no drug users are dying from touching illicit fentanyl or breathing it. And everybody knows that drug users aren't exactly using drugs in hazmat suits. So the idea that like you can breathe in a little bit of fentanyl, a cop can, and he'll die. But drug users are handling the shit all the time, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, and I was just talking about that in the last podcast, where there's videos of cops like starting to pass out because of the fentanyl that they may have touched, and that's why they're wearing gloves. And what it is they're having a panic attack because
they are.
Yes,
but that the problem with that is that like fentanyl exposure isn't toxic, and it's certainly not lethal, but it is for drug users, because first responders who hesitate because they believe that bullshit, it's that seconds of hesitation that that's the life and death difference for an OD victim.
Exactly. And on Claire's podcast, Drug Futurisms, they had a doctor on there that said he went to one of the hospitals and they had towels under the door and had somebody who was overdosing sealed in a room, and they weren't helping him because they were worried it was fentanyl.
Yeah.
This is because of the misinformation.
Yes. I offered to swim in a pool of illicit fentanyl or sit in a bathtub or, breathe in whatever, like, to disprove this myth. But I couldn't find any cops who were willing to take me up on it. But
they give you a bathtub full of fentanyl.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's common sense. Like you can touch all the other opioids, no problem. But this stuff, which is, clearly lethal when injected, smoked or snorted, that's how fentanyl exposure can kill you. And in, with the first responder hesitation. I mean, at the start of COVID, Texas and I think it was Indiana had a rule that you couldn't like basically help an overdose victim. You couldn't give them Narcan, because it's COVID and also there could be fentanyl in them and all these other ridiculous reasons. And it's like, I mean, the bullshit that these guys believe, like the DEA needs to be completely disavowing that information and apologizing for it, but they're not, and the cops that keep pushing it, like, I mean, I'm sure that some of it is done innocently, but at this point, like there's no reason that any first responder or cop should not be aware of the truth. And they would be if the DEA put out a bulletin that said, hey, here's the fact.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely should be put out there. I mean, if we're letting people die because we're scared of something, basically scared of the boogeyman, I mean, this is not, it's not a real thing.
They need the fear. They need the fear. I mean, look, the drug war is so fucking unpopular. So the idea that like, we've got this new bad guy in town and it's fentanyl and it's so bad that you could, brush up against somebody who used fentanyl and you're going to die. Like that's some scary shit that makes taxpayers feel more comfortable about fighting the war on drugs. So, there's nothing, I mean, look, every drug that's outlawed in America, there's some kind of racist catalyst for it being outlawed. We know that. I mean, there's so much lies and bullshit that people just believe. And the DEA and lawmakers, I mean, I have to imagine that there's not a lawmaker in the country that doesn't know this stuff.
That's true. I mean, and the drug war was started this way, right? Harry Anslinger, he hated jazz music because he was just a horrible racist, and he hated Billie Holiday. She was singing that song "Strange Fruit," which she was told to stop singing. So he went after her for heroin. He went after the jazz people for cannabis, and he was on record. He said cannabis is the most, or he said marijuana. He said marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of man.
Well, but the marijuana, he wanted to go after the Mexicans.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that is true. I
mean, there's a great quote from Erlinger, Nixon's,
Mhm.
Nixon's cabinet, who was talking about the racial motives for the drug war. So that these aren't like, I have these conversations with people, and I always say, like, I'm not giving you like my opinions or like some whacked out conspiracy theory that I read on some like bullshit website. Like, these are recorded facts. This
Yep.
was actually said. This is what actually drove these drug laws. This is what actually started, led to the drug war.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at what's been going on over the past 50 years, and the fact that there's not a shred of data the drug war supporters can point to that says this is working. Here's a single fucking positive benefit. Like, there's not one thing that they can say the drug war has improved. And so, what is very discouraging for me sometimes is the idea that, like, these guys literally do not have a single reason to justify what's going on, and will, and because it's fear, so we'll never have enough reasons and facts to convince them.
Yeah.
I mean, we're screaming reasons all the time. I feel like it's such an emotional conversation. It's not rational, and it's emotional for both sides. I mean, those who are like people like us, we want it, health and safety. Like, that's first and foremost. So I feel like instead of trying to convince them that everything will be okay, what we really should be doing is exposing their just cold-heartedness. You guys are letting people die. You want people to die.
That's true. And it's really hard too, because my biggest hurdle I'm having is to reach the conservatives, because we need them. I have to have them on our side on this, or we're going to lose the vote. But they're so hard that, like, I don't know why they're so against it either. It doesn't really make sense. But if you look at it, so we have to talk about the financial aspects of it, the money that'll be saved and made from ending this drug war, because that matters to them, the financial aspect.
Right. Like, when you think about on paper what kind of person is in favor of the drug war, like, you got all these people that are saying, like, all these drug programs cost all this money, and why should I have to pay for it? They don't pay for my insulin, and blah blah blah. And it's like, all right, so I mean, New Jersey, when they legalized pot, there was some crazy statistic about how much money is spent just like prosecuting simple possession charges for pot. So, like, if you say to the average conservative who likes saving money, all right, so we spend $48 billion a year on interdiction that's obviously doing nothing, and you don't like that, so we can have this positive net swing factor. You would never have a single dollar of taxpayer money going toward anything. You'd actually have a surplus, so you like that. If drug users are such terrible people and you want them to die anyway, then why not just give them all the drugs they want, and let us kill ourselves. You want to get rid of the cartels? No problem. I mean, everybody's problems would be solved with legalization and regulation. All the things, like, basically any argument for the drug war is a more effective argument against the drug war.
Yep, I agree. And the homeless problem would start to, we could start solving some of that, and that's what's happened in countries that have legalized. This homelessness goes down, the parks get cleaned up, there's no syringes laying around. I mean, everything, because Switzerland is a very conservative country, and they were really against the new drug laws until they saw how it worked. Now they're all for it. I
mean, the idea of syringes being criminalized, we have this idea that, like, oh my God, if you can get them, then everybody's going to start using drugs. It's like, if that was true, I mean, look, nobody starts shooting up drugs or starts using drugs because clean needles are available. Nobody stops using drugs because clean needles aren't available. If it was true that clean needles led to drug use, then every hospital would be full of people who are every doctor and nurse and so forth would be shooting up drugs. I mean, so it's like we can debunk like almost 100% of these ridiculous myths just by simple common sense, but we choose not to. I mean, clean needles stop the spread of disease. Like, that's the point. They save lives. That's what they do. They don't do anything else.
I agree. And I mean, also, look at the reasons people are shooting up, like this idea, like, so if you look what happened in Vietnam, so like a super high percentage of the soldiers came back as heroin addicts, and 90% of them quit using when they got back and they had access to it. So, the idea that people are they're using in places that are economically devastated. These are people that, had a lot of problems with their home or whatever caused them to seek out these drugs. So let's help them do it safely while they're going through what they're going through. And a lot of them will not be on whatever drug they choose to use the rest of their life. Some of them will. But
well, right. And I mean, the thing about the Vietnam, I mean, there was so much trauma going on there, and so much emotional pain, so much physical pain. I mean, we saw the same thing during the Civil War. I mean, it was millions of doses of laudanum and other kinds of opioids that were given out during the Civil War. Like a war is the kind of place where that would breed that kind of that would people would start using to dull the pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes perfect sense. And then you come back and you're safe, and your injuries heal. I don't need this stuff anymore. I mean, it's like in Hazelden when I tried to explain to them, look, I wouldn't need the heroin if the depression wasn't a problem. And I really, I wouldn't have. And they're like, no, addiction is the problem. It's like, I'm pretty sure that this was a massive fucking problem before I tried heroin. And I, pursued heroin because of this problem.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. People that are happy with their lives aren't like, well, I just want to try heroin just for the hell of it. Like, people that want these drugs are people that are dealing with something that they need help with, and they find comfort. Honestly, opiates are very comforting for a mind that's going through, depression. I mean, it's really, really helped me out in the past.
Yeah. They kill pain. Like everybody, if you have hip replacement surgery, nobody's like, well, you're, snap out of that pain. It's an excuse to use opioids. Like hey, you need opioids. This is exactly what they're for. And it's like, right, this is what they're for. They're for killing pain. It work, if that's what somebody wants to do to kill their pain, who are you to tell them not to?
Exactly. And what's sad though with the whole anti-opioid movement is actually they now are telling some pain patients that it's in their head and that they need to meditate or do yoga. And Carolyn, her book, she has a degenerative spine disease, and she takes tramadol every day, and she worries all the time that they're going to cut her off of her medication and tell her that it's all in her head or that she can which is ridiculous. Like, why can't somebody take something that's working for them?
I mean, and that kind of anxiety is, every drug user experiences. I mean, every legal drug user experiences that. It's horrifying. I mean, we're hearing stories all the time about hospice patients being denied painkillers. Like, these people are fucking dying.
Yep.
Make them comfortable. Like, what the fuck is wrong? And the moral judgment on this stuff. Like, these guys. That's the moral failure is not comforting somebody who's dying. The moral failure is letting drug users die in the street instead of making drugs safer. Like, that's fucking immoral.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's what you said in your book. Drug use isn't a moral failure. The punitive drug policy is.
It's totally true.
Definitely. It's probably a good place to wrap this up. That's the what this podcast is all about. But before I let you go, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get into?
I mean, there's probably a million things, but I think we covered some pretty good ground.
We'll tell people to read your book. It's a great book, The Weight of Air.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I should plug the book. Please read the book.
It really is a good book. It's one of those books I couldn't put down. Like, I finished it so fast because you just have a really good way of telling a story, but also that's a lot of powerful information and can make people see addiction under a different light. I think it's important.
Thank you. I hope more people will check it out. If you want to get more information about the book or me, my website is davidposes.com. You can get the book at any bookstore, online or in person. I'm David the Kick on Twitter. All of my other social media handles are on my website. But please reach out anytime. I respond to everybody. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Great to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So good to talk to you. Really, thank you for being on this podcast. It was awesome.
Yeah. Cool. Let's do it again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Cool.
All right, have a good day.
You too.
All right, bye. All right, Peace Nicks. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And if you like what I'm doing, go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Peace on Drugs. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, go to www.thepeaceondrugs.com and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to let Twiggy Branches take us on out.
Are you my doctor? Are you my dealer?